Hey there. I thought I would read you the first chapter of the trilogy, the fantasy trilogy that I'm working on. This is the first book, and I'm going to jump right into it because it's a fairly substantial chapter because it's fantasy. So it is a lot bigger than my mysteries, and um, it just is. Fantasy is fantasy. Okay. So currently, this first book is called Blood Dragon Rising. Um, we shall see if that's what it stays at. And let's get started. Chapter 1. Lisette paced haltingly across her balcony, trying to draw in breath. This evening's gala required her to wear a corset, and although it pushed her breasts into 2 fine rounds, the reward seemed hardly worth the pain. Such was the price for turning 20. The sun had sunk below the horizon, but light still fought the darkness, giving the sky a dark, ashen quality. The island breeze was still too warm, and she pushed at the damp curls along her neck. She gazed outwardly to sea, willing her body to breathe, despite its entrapment. The moon caught her attention, a silver waning crescent hanging low. It disappeared as a shadow swept across. The shadow rotated toward her, revealing familiar eyes that pierced through her, familiar and unwelcome. The first time she met him, she was 6 years old. He had plunged his talons through Uncle Luke's chest, tossing him to the ground and setting him ablaze. Afterward, he'd circled back to her. The cool hardness of claw on her cheek, the bony pad on her small chest, her heart had pounded violently. She'd raised her hand to her neck, spreading her fingers for protection. His breath smelled of ashes. For 15 years she had seen him appear, always near her birthday, when the moon was in transition from waning crescent to waxing. The full moon never saw his shape. The new moon hid it too well. As always, she raised her hand to her neck for protection, mesmerized by the dragon descending before her. She felt the cold stone of the wall on her back and pressed herself against it, her heart beating in a furious rhythm. There was no room for it to pound, except in her neck and her temples. The beast was large, crimson feathers on a lithe body, with a line of golden spikes down his back to his tail, which he whipped about like an annoyed cat. His head was almost delicate in structure, with the large liquid eyes and wide nostrils of a high-bred horse. The ridge above his eyes drew a line to the 2 arched horns between his perked ears. A combination of many animals, he'd been assembled for a fearsome appearance. And he still smelled of ashes. Lisette slid to the ground, thinking of escape. The only thing escaping was her consciousness, and she struggled to keep from fainting. She sat, motionless, watching the dragon come nearer. Time seemed to stop as he approached. He was horrible and beautiful. His talons extended, encircling her waist and pressing their needle sharpness against the corset. Her eyes met his, seeking answers in the silver crescents. His lips curled as he inhaled, causing her to exhale. Their breaths took a steady rhythm, his inhale drawing in her life, hers choking on his smoke and ashes. No words passed between them, but she knew his intentions. He wanted her to die. Consigned to her fate, she lifted her chin in defiance. He would kill her, but he would not break her. She would meet him with one final show of courage. At the last possible moment, he extended a large pair of wings in a slow, lifting motion. With a fierce glare and a breath of smoke, he turned, disappearing into the night. Someone knocked at the door. Mamma entered, sounding impatient. "Lisette, are you ready? Come along." Lisette tried to shout, but her dry throat could only whisper, "Out here." She closed her eyes, squeezing tears down her cheeks. Soft hands embraced her shoulders. "My dear, what happened?" Lisette looked up, pushing the words from her mouth. "I saw the dragon." Her mother helped her to stand and brushed at her gown in silence. The older woman's face paled, though her voice remained steady. Don't be silly, Lisette. Dragons do not exist, except as a figment of your imagination. But, Mamma, now come inside. I have a present for you. The tall, regal woman took her daughter's elbow and steered her away from the balcony and back into the chamber. She slipped her hand into the folds of her dress and held out a piece of silk. Happy birthday! But the dragon! Lisette! Mamma's voice fairly slapped her daughter. There is no dragon. You will get over this childish hysteria and forget all this madness. Now. Lisette was still trying to calm her trembling body, and she wished desperately to get out of her frock and its vice so she could have a proper cry. Even more, she wished her mother believed her. It was always the same. It was not the first visit from this beast, nor their first argument about whether he existed. No doubt it would not be their last. Resigned, Lisette took the silk from her mother's outstretched hand, her head bowed and cheeks flushed. It was light in her palm as she unfolded it. Your necklace! She pulled out a large emerald on a delicate golden chain and held it high to watch it sparkle. The jewel was deep blue-green, the fire in its depths distracting her momentarily. Lisette knew its history, having been passed down from her grandmother's grandmother, always bestowed on their 20th birthday. It is time for you to have it. Her mother took the ends of the chain. Let me put it on you. Lisette stood before the mirror and watched the jewel nestle into the curve above her cleavage, where it glistened with the light. Her eyes caught the green of the jewel and the gold of the dress. If everyone stared at my eyes, I'd be content. She had inherited her mother's curves and her almond-shaped green eyes, but not much more. The Duchess Juliette de Lille was exquisite. Tall and shapely, her skin a delicate shade of the palest blush, like the luster on a pearl. Her black hair perched in an upsweep of braids and curls, with a measured amount of tendrils hanging to accentuate her long neck. The swish of her gown was as musical as water running over stone, and every head turned to watch her glide into a room. Her daughter was several inches shorter, giving her curves less room to maneuver, and she was constantly battling the Caribbean sun to keep her olive skin from darkening. As for her hair, it was thick, auburn, and unruly like her father's, giving her the look of being constantly in motion. All she had to do to earn Mamma's clucking tongue was walk into a room too quickly. Tonight, Mamma spent a good amount of time adjusting her, from the combs in her hair to the hem of her gown. Lisette attempted to stand quietly, despite the stiff brocade of her golden dress and the cramping claustrophobia of the boned corset. She reached up to pull at one of her braids, trying to loosen it and ease her aching head. Mamma slapped her hand away. Stop it, you'll ruin your hair. The older woman fussed with the braid, realigning the combs. Better? Lisette nodded, still thinking of the talons around her waist. There, you look beautiful, Mamma said at last. But why must you scowl so? Lisette opened her mouth for one more protest about the dragon, but decided against it. I am joyful, Mamma. Eric is a fine catch. I am sure I shall have a fine life. A fine life? Her mother cocked her head, her hands clasped in front of her. Lisette, you are to be married to a handsome man, to bear him handsome children, and one day to rule this island of France. You act as though it's an enormous bore. Lisette shrugged. Did you love father when you married him? Mamma waved the question from the air. No one in the aristocracy loves each other. Marriage is duty to the crown. We make unions to strengthen our political ties. Don't we fall in love at all? Dalliances are permitted, of course. Mamma looked down and smiled. Some even have grand passions. But they must not disrupt the marital state. It is akin to treason. Lisette eased herself into a chair and attempted a tired sigh. Her corset rendered it a small huff. If we are only marrying for political reasons, why must we be virgins? The older woman shook her head. Politics is all about men and power. Either they have a little and want more, or they have a lot and still want more. Women are objects to be possessed, and they must be the first buyer. Lisette stared at her mother. And you wonder that I am not excited. We do what we must for king and country. Mamma lifted her chin and glanced at her daughter. I am assuming you do not need instruction in the marital bed. Lisette gave a quick nod. Geneviève told me all I need to know. Thank the gods for ladies' maids. It is a rather coarse subject to share with one's daughter. Her mother brushed Lisette's cheek with the back of her soft hand, stroking upward at her curls. Try to be happy, dear. Yes, you will have to bed a man you don't love, but at least he is handsome, and you will be the mistress of your own home. In time you will have children. If you need to love something, you can give them your heart. Yes, children. Lisette attempted a smile, even though she could not imagine anything she wanted less. Splendid. Mamma narrowed her eyes. Let me be clear. You need heirs. We don't want the Medina family. Yes, the Spanish loyalists on the island are trying to drive a wedge between us all and nab Ile des Oiseaux for themselves. Lisette rolled her eyes. Political intrigue bores me so. Her mother's jaw tightened. Lisette. Of course, I will not disappoint you. She bowed her head to keep her face from betraying her feelings. Au revoir. Good. Let us go downstairs. Jules is meeting us to escort you into the hall. Mamma took a step, hesitated, and turned to pull Lisette into a warm embrace. I may not have loved your father at the beginning, but I love him now, and I've always loved you and your brother. Lisette put her arms around her mother's waist and nestled her face against her shoulder. I love you too, Mamma. Sometimes I wish I didn't have to marry and leave you. I shall miss you, my Lizzie. But the wedding is months away. Let's think about that later. Tonight is for celebration. The air was cooler as Lisette descended, but there was still a steamy quality to the evening. Pushing the dragon from her thoughts, she dabbed at the moistness around her cheekbones, catching one last tear as she did. The betrothal to Eric would be announced tonight. The wedding would be in a few short months. It was all happening, whether she wanted it or not. She allowed herself a small, resigned sigh. No one cared what she wanted, not even her. A slow, steady breath brought the scent of night-blooming jasmine, calming her as she walked down the stairs and prepared to start her new life. She had no idea just how new her life would become. Enjoy.